God, I was so scared. But my grandma came in and turned the lights on, and the voice was gone immediately. What is it? What happened? Ugh, how cold. Why'd you open the window? My brother and I stood there shivering from the cold and fear. My brother began to cry. Grandma closed the window. She took my brother by the hand, and I didn't know how to explain everything to her. I didn't understand anything myself. My brother just cried and wanted to go to sleep. He didn't remember anything. He just rubbed his eyes with his fist and yawned. My grandmother put him to bed and covered him with a blanket, and then she sat on my bed and asked me, "What happened? Tell me." I said that there were some strange voices outside the window, that my brother most likely walked in his sleep, and that during the day he was also seeing something and talking to someone. It seemed to me that it was all nonsense, that my brother simply had some kind of heat stroke from the summer sun, or maybe he was imagining things like all children do. Maybe I just dreamt it all. Maybe it was the dog barking like that. Pie, pie, pie. But my grandma suddenly became serious. She frowned, turned off the light, and went to the window. "Granny, what's there? Is there someone there?" My grandmother silently looked out the window, and I also fell silent. The room became unusually quiet. Even the clock on the wall stopped ticking. I'd never heard such silence ever again. I was very scared. I looked at my grandmother's silhouette. She was frozen like a guard at a gate. I don't know how long my grandma stood by that window like that. My eyelids got heavier and I fell asleep. In the morning, my brother woke me up, cheerful and carefree as usual. I've always been like that too, but that morning I wasn't in the mood for games. A scary night incident left an uneasy feeling in my soul. The weather turned bad. It was drizzling rain, and clouds covered the sky. When my grandmother entered the room, I could see from her face that she didn't go to sleep after the incident. She called my brother and asked me to stay in the room. My brother took his toy car and left. My grandma smiled at me. I think she wanted to cheer me up. When I was left in the room alone, I began to recall the night's events. What was it? Why is Grandma acting so strange? Why did she only take brother? I got very curious, and I quietly opened the door. Downstairs in the living room, I heard women's voices. But who were they? I went down lower and saw one of the women's legs. She was walking from corner to corner. She was silent. Then another woman got up from the chair behind her. Her stick hit the floor. This woman was very old. She went to the first legs and said, "Hachishakusama." I heard my grandmother let out a scream. What is Hachi? I thought. The woman who was walking said, "We must take him away from Japan. There's no time to hesitate." The old woman began to mutter something I did not understand, a word. I only heard Hachishakusama, come up there. I stood and listened when the door opened behind me, squeaked and swung open. The window opened wide as well. Wind and rain broke into the house. I ran into the room and quickly closed the door behind me. The curtains rose and fell. I stood there hoping that the woman downstairs didn't hear me. It seemed like everything was quiet. They did not hear. Catching my breath, I sat on the bed and started to look up this word on my phone. But I was interrupted by a voice in the garden. Pie, pie. God, I must be dreaming. Honey, it's Mom. It was really my mom's voice. I looked out the window and saw a familiar silhouette. Mom? Mommy? You're already here? Where's Dad? You don't know what happened. I'll tell you right now. Wait, Mom, I'm coming right now. Mom was standing outside the window and smiling at me. I ran out of the room and happily went down the stairs, running past the living room with the strange woman in it. I hopped to the exit. Granny, Mom is here, I yelled as I opened the door. My mother was standing in the doorway. She smiled at me, but she was taller. She was so tall that I had to tilt my head back to look at her face. Honey, where is your brother? Mom, why are you so big? Honey, where is your brother? I took a couple of steps back. My mother stayed at the door. She smiled and looked kindly at me. At that moment, someone touched my shoulder. I turned around. It was my grandmother. She was looking at me scared. Honey, let's go. Let's go. But Mom is here, I answered. But my grandmother was taking me to the living room where those women were. She seated me at the table where my brother was sitting. My grandmother's face was gray and there were tears in her eyes. The women were calling somewhere all the time, asking for something. Grandma came up to me and took my hand. "You and your brother can't stay with me. I called your father tomorrow. He will pick you up." "But Mom's already here. Have you seen her? Why don't you invite her in?" Grandma was crying. I felt sorry for her. I didn't want to leave, and I didn't understand why my mother stayed outside the door. Grandma and her two friends stood at the windows in our room all night. My brother was waking up often. He wanted to go somewhere. I couldn't sleep. I dreamed that my mom was calling me, that I needed to go to her. And then I heard that voice. Hey, hey, hey. I was shivering in my bed. My brother was crying and wanted to leave. Grandma was holding him in her arms and softly whispering a lullaby into his ear. And the morning finally came. When I woke up, there was no one in the room. I looked at the ceiling with a sunbeam on it. The birds were singing outside the window and the sun was shining. And everything that happened in the past few days seemed like a terrible dream. I heard a car pull up and my dad's voice. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs. Dad was already going through the door. I jumped at him, almost knocking him down. Dad hugged me tightly, so tight that something cracked in my back. He put me on the floor and I looked at him. His eyes were red and swollen. His face was unshaven with prickly bristles sticking out in all directions. "Hello, honey. Where's Grandma?" Grandma just came up behind me. Dad looked at her and a tear ran down his cheek. Grandma hugged him and they stood like that for a long time, hugging at the door. Then my grandma brought my brother. Dad took him in his arms and carried him outside. My grandmother took me outside holding my hand. The warm sun was shining and I still remembered the smell of the herbs. These were the last moments of my childhood. I would never go back there again. Dad put us in the car and fastened our seatbelts. My grandma was standing there and looking at us leaving. I felt so sad that I started to cry loudly. My brother looked at me and began to cry as well. Dad quickly started the car, and grandmother's house, grandmother herself, and Hachishakusama became a shrinking image in the rearview mirror. At home, we were told that our mom had gotten into a car accident, that she was fighting for 2 days, and now she was no longer with us. Years later, I found out that the Hachishakusama is a demon that takes away children who have no parents, or parents left their children. Our mother died, and our dad was drinking heavily. The demon had come to take us to a place where no one ever came back from.